Welcome to the deep dive. If you're prepping for exams on the EU's legal structure, well, specifically how and where the EU can actually act, this is for you. We're aiming to distill your class notes on EU competences into a clear, exam-ready map.
Exactly. The mission today is really to cut through that, complexity. We want you to leave understanding not just the rules, but the core tension here. It's this constant push and pull between member state sovereignty and the need for EU effectiveness.
Right. And to understand any of it, we have to start at the absolute foundation. The principle of Conferral, that's Article 5 of the Treaty on European Union, the TEU. What does that actually mean for the EU?
Fundamentally, it means the EU isn't like a normal country. It doesn't have inherent powers. It acts only within the limits of the competences that the member states have specifically given it through the treaties. That's it. If a power isn't written down, it stays with the states.
And that's a crucial difference, isn't it? That the EU has no sort of original power? That really highlights its international origins, even if it acts domestically a lot.
Absolutely. The Court of Justice nailed this down ages ago in Van Gendon Loos. They called the EU sui generis, one of a kind. And the implication flowing right from Conferral is that the EU always has to justify its actions based on the treaties. It also paved the way for direct effect and supremacy, the ideas that give EU law real teeth over national law. The states gave power, and the court made sure it stuck.
So a direct consequence of Conferral being so strict is that every single EU law, every directive, every regulation needs a specific legal basis, a treaty article justifying it.
Precisely. You can't just invent a reason to act. And this is a huge deal for judicial review. If the EU institutions pick the wrong treaty article, the Court of Justice can just strike down the whole law. So choosing the basis is, well, it's often quite strategic.
Strategic? How so? Like, what if a law covers, say, both the internal market and environmental rules? They might have different legal bases.
Yeah, that's where the court's center of gravity idea comes in. They look at the main purpose and content of the act. What's it really about? The legal basis has to match that dominant aim. But the strategic bit is sometimes the institutions might try to use a basis that allows for easier voting in the council, like qualified majority voting, even if another basis requiring everyone to agree, unanimity, might arguably fit better.
Ah, okay. So it becomes a political negotiation point, too, not purely legal.
Exactly right. It's that classic tension, the legal rules versus the political push for getting things done efficiently.
Okay, let's get into the internal map then. Lisbon really helped by setting out three clear types of competence: exclusive, shared, and supporting. This framework is, well, it's essential for understanding the EU's reach.
Let's start with the most clear-cut. Exclusive competences, that's Article 3 of the TFEU. Simplest category, but also the most rigid. Basically, only the Union can make laws here. Member states are pretty much sidelined unless the EU specifically asks them to step in, maybe for some implementation details.
And what's the really critical thing for listeners to remember about that list in Article 3?
It's exhaustive, finite. You cannot add to it through practice or court cases. If you want a new exclusive competence for the EU, maybe something totally unforeseen, the member states, the masters of the treaties, have to agree to change the treaties themselves. That's a huge undertaking, obviously. It keeps a tight lock on state sovereignty in these core areas.
So even if the EU hasn't actually legislated yet in an exclusive field, say common commercial policy, the individual member states still can't act.
That's right. The power belongs only to the EU. Take conservation of marine biological resources under the Common Fisheries Policy, Article 3.1. Even if Brussels is still working out the details, Spain or France can't just make their own rules for their fishing waters. The competence has been fully transferred.
Okay, moving to the biggest category, the one where most action happens. Shared competences. Article 4, TFEU. This is where that sovereignty versus effectiveness battle really plays out, isn't it?
Definitely. In shared areas, both the EU and the member states can legislate. But, and this is the crucial bit, that member states' power is limited by the principle of preemption.
Preemption. That sounds like the EU gets first dibs.
Essentially, yes. Member states can only legislate if and only as long as the EU hasn't already legislated on that specific point. So as the EU passes more laws in shared areas, the space for national laws gradually shrinks. It's often described as a sort of creeping competence or erosion of national power in favor of the Union.
But there are some controls on that to stop the EU taking over everything. I think Protocol now 25 is relevant here.
Absolutely vital. Protocol 25 clarifies that preemption only applies to the specific elements the EU has actually regulated in an act. It doesn't mean the EU occupies the entire policy field just by passing one narrow directive. So if the EU sets rules for truck driver hours, it doesn't automatically preempt national rules on, say, railway safety, even though both are transport. It's meant to keep the preemption effect targeted.
Got it. And the third category, the lightest touch, supporting competences, Articles 5 and 6 TFEU, things like education, culture, tourism, public health. These feel very national.
And they largely remain so. These are primarily member state responsibilities. The EU's role here is really just to support, coordinate, maybe encourage cooperation. Think of the Erasmus program, great example. The EU helps students move around and get qualifications recognized, but the actual running of universities is firmly a national competence.
And the key legal difference from shared competences.
No preemption. That's the absolute key takeaway. EU action in a supporting field does not stop member states from acting. And importantly, the Union cannot adopt harmonization measures here. It can't force member states to align their national laws on, say, school curricula.
Okay, so we have this internal structure. Conferral sets the base, and exclusive, shared, supporting define the powers. But the EU operates in a dynamic world. What about flexibility or projecting power outside the EU?
All right, well, internally, there's the flexibility clause, Article 352 TFEU. It's a sort of gap filler. If the EU needs to act to achieve a treaty goal, but the treaties didn't provide the specific power, the Council can, acting unanimously, use Article 352 to adopt the measure.
That was used quite a bit historically, wasn't it, for things that weren't originally in the treaties?
Yes, environmental policy, consumer protection, setting up some agencies, they often relied on this clause before getting their own specific legal basis. But it's strictly controlled, needs unanimity, can't be used for harmonization where it's forbidden, and can't basically amend the treaties by the back door. Still respects conferral.
Now, what about looking outwards? The EU signs international treaties all the time. Does having an internal power automatically mean it has the external power to make international agreements in that area?
That's a fascinating question, and it leads us to the theory of implicit powers. This wasn't explicitly written down initially. It was developed by the Court of Justice. They used the principle of utile effective functioning. The court essentially asked, if the EU sets internal rules, say, for the environment, doesn't it also need the power to make international agreements to ensure those internal rules aren't undermined by external commitments?
And the landmark case here is AETR from 1970.
The AETR case, exactly, or ERTIA in some contexts. It established this principle of parallelism of external competences. The court said, basically, when the EU adopts internal rules that create common standards, it implicitly gains the external competence needed to conclude international agreements relating to that subject matter.
Why was that so important, politically and legally?
Because otherwise, member states could go off and sign international treaties that conflicted with the EU's internal laws, completely undermining the whole point of having common rules. So this implied external competence ensures the EU can act coherently both inside and outside its borders. It was a major step in asserting the EU's international legal personality, moving beyond just strict conferral.
And this judge-made rule, it's now cemented in the treaties.
Yes, it's largely reflected in Article 216 TFEU. This article confirms the EU can conclude international agreements when the treaties provide for it, or when it's needed to achieve an internal objective, or importantly, where an agreement might affect internal EU rules. The Implied Powers Doctrine is now very much part of the EU's constitutional fabric.
Okay, so we know what powers the EU has, where they come from conferral, the categories implied powers. But how are these powers controlled? We need the safety nets for member states. Let's talk proportionality and subsidiarity.
Absolutely crucial. These are the checks on how the EU exercises its competences, especially the shared ones. First, proportionality. This applies always to all EU action. It means whatever the EU does must be limited to what's genuinely necessary to achieve the treaty objective. It must be the least intrusive means possible.
And that has practical consequences for the type of law the EU chooses.
Yes, definitely. Proportionality generally pushes towards using a directive rather than a regulation, particularly in shared competence areas. Remember Article 288 TFEU? A directive sets a goal but leaves the how to member states through national implementation. That's seen as inherently more respectful of national systems, more proportional than a directly applicable regulation which just overrides national law entirely.
Okay, and the other big one, subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity applies only in areas where competence is not exclusive to the EU. So, shared and supporting areas. This is the principle designed to ask, is action at the EU level really necessary? It says the EU should only act if the objectives cannot be sufficiently achieved by the member states acting alone, either at central or regional level, and can therefore be better achieved at the union level because of the scale or effects of the proposed action. It's about EU added value.
And Lisbon introduced a specific mechanism involving national parliaments to police this,
Yeah.
the card system.
That's right, Protocol 2. It gives national parliaments a direct role in scrutinizing draft EU laws before they're adopted and ex-ante political checks specifically on subsidiarity grounds.
How do those cards work? What are the thresholds?
Well, there's the yellow card. If 1/3 of the votes allocated to national parliaments object on subsidiarity grounds, or just a quarter for laws concerning justice and home affairs, the Commission has to review its proposal. It doesn't have to withdraw it, but it must reconsider and explain its decision.
And the orange card. That's stronger.
Much stronger, yes. This needs a majority of the national parliamentary votes. If an orange card is raised, the Commission must review. If it decides to maintain the proposal, it has to justify why. Then, the proposal can actually be blocked if either a simple majority in the European Parliament or 55% of the Council members vote against it. It puts a real potential roadblock in place.
So let's recap the whole journey. Competence starts with conferral from member states. It's then channeled into three categories: exclusive, shared, supporting mainly defined by whether preemption applies. The EU can gain external powers through implied powers, as shown in AETR. And finally, the exercise of these powers is governed by subsidiarity and proportionality.
That's a great summary. And remember, nearly all of this, the choice of legal basis, respect for subsidiarity, and proportionality can be challenged before the Court of Justice. The CJEU is the ultimate referee in these ongoing debates about power.
Right. Which brings us to a final thought. Given how high the threshold is for that orange card procedure under Protocol 2, and the fact that the Commission rarely actually withdraws proposals even after a yellow card, how effective do you really think this subsidiarity check is in practice? Is it genuinely halting that erosion of shared competences we talked about? Or is the sheer momentum of EU integration and the principle of effectiveness usually going to win out in the end? Something for you to consider. Good luck with the exams.